Over 600,000 people go missing a year in the United States, and many of these cases simply remain unsolved with families never getting closure, or so the government would have you believe. Truth is, they would rather have these families not know what really happened. They would rather the world didn't know. What was that Men in Black line? A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals. So rather than telling you that your father was eaten by a werewolf, or your daughter was attacked by a shapeshifter, they simply tell you that they went missing. That doesn't take care of the problem though, which is where I come in. Well, me and my fellow hunters. That's what I call myself, though it may not be the official term. You see, my parents were killed by one such monster when I was a child, and the government in its infinite wisdom decided that rather than sending me to an orphanage, they would turn me into a monster hunter. They experimented on me, taught me how to kill, and gave me state-of-the-art weaponry, all for one singular purpose. Not the career that I aspired to as a child, but it pays well enough. However, enough with this preamble. Let's get into what you really came here for. A story of a time where I tangled with one of these creatures. It was a Wednesday morning when I got the call. 6 teenagers had gone missing after going on a camping trip. A whole day gone with no contact from them. Normally, I would only be called in after all other law enforcement had failed. But one of the teens was a daughter of a high-ranking government official. Someone in the know had pulled enough strings to have me hired as a consultant. I arrived that night and was assigned a partner, a young woman named Jenna, who seemed nice enough, just clueless on what really goes on in the world. Your job is to help me in any way possible. You are just a consultant. I'm the one in charge. You understand? I nodded my head. I was perfectly happy with letting Jenna solve this on her own, if it meant not getting my hands dirty. The first thing we did was talk to the parents as she wanted to follow up on something. The parents were of course no help. However, I got the chance to talk to my employer. So, what do you think? Is there a monster involved in this? He asked me in private. I can't say yet, sir. I'll have to go to the campsite to see what exactly happened. If it is, I'll make sure to take care of it. I tried to assure him. Truth is, if it was a monster, his daughter was likely dead already, but I couldn't tell him that. He was frightened enough as it is. After the questioning, we headed straight to the forest that the teens went to camp in. At night, it was almost pitch black and oddly silent. Is it usually this quiet? I inquire, to which Jen replies, Normally, no. We have quite a few animals in these parts. I'm worried something got to the kids. Not good. Something had scared off all of the animals. Looks like I'll be doing more than consulting after all. We were barely inside the forest when I started smelling blood and death. Jenna, of course, was none the wiser. She had not gone through the same kind of experiments and training as I had, which meant that she was now just a liability. How about we split up, Jenna? Cover more ground that way. I'll give you a call if I find anything. Jenna thinks for a moment and then responds, All right, William, but don't touch anything. Call me immediately. Of course, I'll go this way, I reply, and then head off to where the smell is coming from, as Jenna heads the opposite way. The stench was getting stronger, and eventually I arrived at what seemed to be the campsite. The scene before me was gruesome, something I had become familiar with in this line of work. Poor kids had been enjoying s'mores when whatever creature attacked. Slash marks across all of their bodies. Not deep enough to kill instantly, but enough to make them bleed out. The creature had done this for sport. I count the bodies. 5 in total. My employer's daughter was missing. It can't be a coincidence. Wonder if he knew more than what he was letting on. And then I heard a scream, piercing the silence of the forest. Jenna. I rushed towards her as fast as I can, moving as a blur. As I arrive, I see what caused the scream. It was tall and skinny. Some part of its body was covered in grayish fur while the rest was just bone. It had the skull of a deer, antlers and all, with the teeth of a canine, red with blood. A Wendigo. A side effect when cannibals eat a little bit too much at once. It was eating the daughter, but his attention had been turned to Jenna, who screams, "What the hell is that?" I do not take the time to explain, instead dashing towards it, bringing out my retractable knife and stabbing it in the chest, making sure to slip it through its ribcage. Wendigos, despite their form, still have similar anatomy to a human, and stabbing at its heart will kill it instantly. Unfortunately for me, I miss, hitting the lung instead, giving the monster time to grab me and fling me into a tree, breaking it as a result. All I seem to have done is make it angry. And then I hear gunshots. Jenna seemed to have gotten over her fear. A little good it does though. Wendigos might be skinny, but their bone is quite tough. It charges towards her instead, as she keeps firing a gun even as the clip runs out. "Run!" I shout. She doesn't hear me as the Wendigo charges into her, knocking her down. Jenna lies on the floor, eyes closed and crying as the Wendigo opens its mouth, wide enough to take her entire head with a single bite. Fortunately for her, that never comes. The Wendigo collapses. Poison had finally taken its effect. My aim has always been terrible, so I take extra measures. I approach it and I pull my blade out, while giving it a kick to make sure that it's dead for good. Jenna is still on the floor crying her eyes out and screaming, not realizing what has happened. "It's over. The Wendigo's dead," I said soothingly. After what seems to be a minute, she opens her eyes, red from all the tears. "The what? You know what that thing was?" Crap, I probably shouldn't have said that. "Yeah, but that's not important now. You should head back. In the morning, bring the others in, you can take the bodies." I tell her, remaining calm. "What should I tell the others? The parents?" she asked frantically. "I'm sure you have predators in this forest. Say one of them got to the kids and that's it. You must lie to them. You understand?" She nods her head. "Alright, go. I'll be right behind you." I hope that she's able to lie. I was. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't tell her that the slash marks on the teens weren't from the Wendigo. I couldn't tell her that the daughter's already dead body had simply attracted the Wendigo. Which of course begs the question, if the Wendigo didn't kill them, what did? It seems a lot of you liked my last update, so I thought I would share another. Now technically, I'm not supposed to be telling you all this, but who's going to find out anyway? This time, I was in the suburbs, listening to a man tell me and a few others his story. He had posted a help wanted ad publicly, so of course a pair of ghost hunters and a pastor decided to investigate. Our house is possessed, and what's haunting it keeps attacking me. It almost killed me last week. He showed us his cast as he said this. Thankfully, my daughter hasn't been harmed at all, but I wasn't sure how long that would last. That's why we're living with my sister. It's just the two of us, you know. My wife, well, she ran out on us a month ago, and the house is really all we have, he says. So, his wife runs out on her family, and soon the house attacks her husband. I wonder if she knew something that scared her off. Well, you have come to the right people. We can talk to the spirit and get it to leave, says one of the ghost hunters, a woman named Angie. Her partner was called Ray while the pastor went by Father Michael. A bunch of useless amateurs who would simply get in my way. While they asked Mr. Hanson more questions, I decided to go speak to the girl. Children tend to be more perceptive about these sort of things. Adults try to rationalize what they see while children tell it to you straight. She was with her aunt playing with her toys. I smile at the aunt. Just want to ask her a few questions. And then I turn my attention towards the little one. "Hey there, my name is William. What's yours?" I asked. "Jessica," she says shyly. "Well, Jessica, I'm going to deal with the big bad monster in your house. Is there anything that you can tell me about it?" She finally looks up at me. "She is not a monster. She's always nice to me, but she doesn't like Daddy. Daddy needs to say sorry to her." Well, that was interesting. Not often is a ghost selective of its victims. Her dad walks in a second later. "Well, we're going to leave now. Are you ready to go, Mr. William?" "It's just William, and yes, I am. Let's head out." Angie volunteered to drive us all there in her van. Not entirely useless after all. The journey was quick. His house was quite near his sister's place. As soon as we got out of the car, I could smell the corpse. It was subtle, not something the average person would smell. However, I was far from average. The house itself looked quite big, a single story but with 3 bedrooms. Not unlike the house that I had when I was very young. It looked run down though, almost like a construction site had started to tear it apart. "Well, this is the place. If you don't mind, I'm going to stay out here," Mr. Hanson says to us. Not unexpected. Whatever was haunting the place had given him quite the beating, leaving the 4 of us to go in. As I step into the house, I get to see the full extent of the damage done. Shattered glass all over the floor, furniture all over the place, large cracks in the walls. The structure was clearly falling apart, only a matter of time before the entire thing fell down. Angie says out loud what was on all of our minds. "Jesus, this is one angry spirit." She turns to her partner. "Well, get the stuff out. Let's try to talk to it." Her partner nods, bringing out a laptop and other devices. "Ta," she simply says. "You guys can just watch. Really, we should be able to do this ourselves." The pastor, paying no attention to them, begins throwing holy water everywhere. It's a whole bunch of nonsense. Suddenly, the house shakes, my entire body with it. A powerful ghost, which could only mean something important was keeping it tethered to this place. The ghost hunters begin talking into a mic. "Dear Spirit, we come in peace. Please speak to us." The spirit screams,
"Get out!"
shaking the whole house in the process. The others fall to the floor right on all the glass. Unfortunately, I did not have time to check up on them, so I simply shout, "Well, you heard it. Leave." The pastor is the first one to run off. The other 2 take some time to decide. I do not wait, drawing my retractable blade and pouring oil all over it, and then I begin slowly exploring the house. Cutlery flies towards me like bullets, easily dodged, but that was simply a warning. I keep moving forward, glass cracking beneath my boots. The screaming returns.
"You are not wanted here."
Every syllable shaking the house. My last chance to walk away, but that was never an option. I keep moving forward, trying to head in the direction of where the scream came from. I see pictures as I do, mostly of the daughter and father. It was clear the mom had been cut out of them. Eventually, I enter the master bedroom, and as bad as the rest of the house was, this was far worse. The room itself had been flooded, and nothing was where it belonged, from the bed to the cupboards. Moreover, there was a large hole in the wall, no doubt where the dad had been flung into. The spirit had a clear disdain for this room. Oddly though, I could smell a lot of bleach. Leaving the room, I head towards the daughter's bedroom, only for the screaming to return.
No, you cannot go there.
Instantly, the entire floor around me collapses, sending me right down into the basement. I look up and staring me dead in the eyes was the spirit. It was a female corpse with bruises and cuts all over her body. Like most ghosts, she was almost transparent and floating in midair. Now, I could have gone through the whole ritual and peacefully released her from this earth, but that was the pastor's job. I'm not built like that. She screams again, shaking the entire house, forcing me to stab the ground to remain steady. I needed to end it quick. The longer it was drawn out, the more it would hurt. I took a lighter out of my pocket and brought it to my sword, which instantly caught fire. But the process gave her enough time to blast me again, through the wall this time. Most men would be dead at this point, but I just dropped my sword. I threw myself up from the ground and dashed towards her faster than she could see. In one fell swoop, I picked my sword and I sliced right through her. The blade does not connect with anything, of course. Ghosts are tricky like that, but the flames remain on her body. She begins to cry as she burns away, slowly turning into a beautiful young woman who looked a lot like the daughter. The mother, I assumed, confirming my suspicions. The sad part of the job is, many of these people did not choose to become what they are. Forces beyond their control turn them into these monsters that I and others alike must deal with. She almost disappears when she whispers, "Please, you must save her. Don't let him hurt her like you did me. Save her, please." I understood immediately, having pieced together a lot already. I pulled out my blade and I put it in the sheath, and then I headed upstairs and walked past the ghost hunters, who were still in shock. As I head outside, I draw my pistol. Monsters come in all forms. My job is to slay them. On this night, I was in the outskirts of an old town, where the government had set up a secret lab to study the arcane. Something had gone wrong, however, resulting in the lab being overrun by beasts and all the scientists in it had been killed. My task was to extract a hard drive containing the research that they had done. A different kind of mission than usual, but the money involved was big. They didn't tell me the specifics of what was going on in the lab, but that doesn't surprise me. Government loves its secrets. Before heading in, I sprayed myself with a special liquid to totally mask my scent. Stealth was key here. In hindsight though, it didn't make too much of a difference. From there, I began exploring the lab. I had been given the layout beforehand, but it was different once you were actually there. Some variables that no blueprint could inform you of. As I explored the place, I came across the bodies of men in military uniform. I assumed the initial government's response team, in hopes to avoid calling someone like me. They never learn. The bodies had been pummeled, bones completely shattered by sheer blunt force. Whatever was in this place was clearly strong. What was odd, however, was the lack of bodies of the scientists. All I found was torn up pieces of clothing with no blood on them, rather some sort of slime. It wasn't long before a creature came in my path. Unlike any I had seen before or ever read about. It was a humanoid with glowing red skin, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a long reptilian tail. It only had 3 toes and fingers on each foot, and hand which had no nails on them. Its head was just as odd as the rest of it, with its skin wrapped tightly around its skull, with its eyes bulging out. As a test, I took a shot at its head and it caught the bullet. All I seemed to have done is make it angry. It dashed towards me at speeds fast enough to cause a sonic boom. The boom itself was deafening. It disoriented me, but I narrowly avoided the charge. I drew my swords as it turned around and charged again. This time I was ready, striking towards its head, but it ducked and punched me with enough force to go straight through a normal man. I barely managed to get up before it moves in again. This time I attacked as it did, dodging the punch while plunging my sword through its head. Slime poured right out, the same kind I found on the clothes of the scientist. It took some time to study the creature, trying to find out what it is and whether it had any weak spots. I sliced it up to look inside, only to find an anatomy quite similar to a human. It's not the nicest thing to look at, but studying the monster would come in handy. What worried me though was that this was a brand new threat. After that, I began walking towards the main lab, trying to piece together what exactly I had learned. These creatures bleed slime, the same kind found on the clothing, which could mean the scientists may not be dead after all, and they'd possibly managed to hurt the creatures and were hiding somewhere. It seemed unlikely though, given how strong the creature I just fought was. My thoughts were broken, however, when I saw the creatures again as I turned a corner. Another one, and given the fight I just had, it was best to avoid it. I took a different path. It was longer, but it was better than fighting another creature so soon. Eventually, I came across a tightly locked door. According to the building blueprint, the room was where all the testing occurred. I decided to take a peek through a window in the door, and was surprised with what I saw. There were more of the creatures, but what really got my attention was what seemed to be a large portal in the room. Magic. Having fought my fair share of wizards and witches, magic had been something that I did my best to avoid. Nothing ever good happened when people started using spells. That said, it did explain where the creatures came from, but that raised another question. The lab's door was tightly shut, with no sign of breaking, so how did they get out? I kept moving forward as I thought about all of this. The more that I explored the lab, the more confusing things got. I knew the government had the answers, but it was unlikely that they would tell me anything. They were researching something, and it backfired. Clearly though, they haven't learned their lesson, as I'm sure they plan on using the hard drive to continue this elsewhere. And here I was, helping them do this, almost near the location of the drive. I stopped in my tracks, as right in front of the room were more creatures. There were 3 this time, all just as odd as the last few. Unfortunately, they were right in my way of where I needed to go. I knew fighting them was only going to end bad, so I decided to take my chance with a flashbang. It confused them, which gave me enough time to throw 2 smoke grenades and dash forward, relying on my hearing to get through, but their screeching made it difficult to tell where I was going. I hit something and I fell right to the ground. The creatures began screeching, indicating that they knew I was here. That was it, I had thought at least, drawing my sword and preparing to fight for my life. But in the chaos of it all, the creatures began attacking each other, unaware of my presence on the ground. As they wildly swung at each other, I crawled towards the door. They stepped right in front of me a few times, but in the heat of the moment, they didn't realize. Somehow I managed to get to the door, which was thankfully unlocked. I rushed inside and unlocked the door immediately, as the creatures kept fighting. I took a moment to catch my breath. Suddenly, something grabbed me and flung me across the room into the computers. Before I got the chance to see who did it, I'm kicked right in the face into the steel wall behind me. I didn't need to see to know who it was. Relentlessly it attacks, pounding on me like a wild animal. I tasted blood on my mouth, hear my bones crack, but I wasn't going down without a fight. Using all my strength, I pushed it off, and then followed up by taking it to the ground, putting it in a lock and attempting to choke it out. It thrashes around, trying to throw me off, but I hold on, remembering that these things have lungs just like me. After an entire minute, it passed out. Slowly I got up, taking out my sword, and then I stabbed it to make sure that it stayed down. After cleaning the slime off my blade, I began looking around for the hard drive, rummaging through the computers. I noticed another set of clothes covered in slime near them. Eventually, I find the hard drive, which was somehow still intact. The battle outside the room had also reached its conclusion too, with only one creature still alive, but gravely injured. It didn't seem to notice what was going on inside the room, fortunately. But on the other hand, I noticed something outside of it. There were more clothes covered in slime, but more importantly, one of the dead creatures still had some clothing stuck to it. It was then that I realized that the government had lied to me. The creatures hadn't killed the scientists. The creatures were the scientists. This story took place during my early days as a hunter. I was itching to fight monsters, eager to test my new abilities and used to what I had been. How naive of me, but it had been going well. I would take just about any job even if a supernatural presence was not guaranteed. Which is how I ended up in a bus full of people heading towards an old resort. The resort was in the middle of two major cities, and one was once a very popular place for vacations. However, at some point, people began dying inexplicably. No one could figure out what was responsible, and eventually, people stopped going there, causing the place to shut down. I was browsing an online forum dedicated to the supernatural when I saw someone propose a trip to see if the rumors were true. I decided to tag along, in the slight chance that there was anything for me. Actually, quite a few people ended up tagging along. Some were looking to make a found footage film, while others were simply curious. We all set up in the city before getting on a bus that was going to pass the resort. I sat next to a man named Solomon. "So, Will, do you think we're going to find an undead killer or not?" There was no fear or nervousness in his voice, just pure excitement. "It's William, and I'm not sure," I replied calmly. How normal humans can be excited to meet monsters has always confused me. When we got there, we decided to explore the hotel first, hoping whatever was responsible for deaths resided there. We split into groups, 5 in total, with me pairing up with Solomon and a young woman named Elisa. While Solomon was excited to meet a supernatural creature, Elisa wanted to prove the rumors false. She didn't believe in the supernatural at all and only joined to show the world the truth. We ended up on the 3rd floor looking for the creature. I could sense the presence of something unnatural, but I couldn't pinpoint its location. Until I began hearing the elevators. The creature was using it to move across the building. It wasn't long before the smell of blood clouded the air. Elisa was rightfully terrified, but Solomon just seemed happy. Something was odd about that man, but I didn't have the time to find out what it was. A scream pierced through the ground, and I knew instantly where it was. I tell the others to stay here before rushing over as fast as I can, until I reach the location of the scream. Seeing it for the first time made it clear that this was no normal human. He was huge and muscular, with a tight, long-sleeved black shirt and cargo pants on. In his right hand was a big woodcutter's axe, which he used to completely behead the man who organized this whole trip. He was one of the several dead already. It turned towards me, and I got a good look at his face. Dark gray skin with maggots sticking out of his orifices, and blood-stained clothing. There was no emotion in him, which was common for many undead. He killed simply for the sake of it, and did manage to stealthily go room to room and pick us off one by one. I shoot him in the head, having not yet learned that guns are useless against most creatures. Of course, it does nothing except resulting in him charging towards me. No one to sit around and wait. I dash forward and I uppercut him right into the floor above. "Get out of here now," I shout to the others still alive. Back then I cared about protecting civilians, a waste of time I would eventually learn. After I make sure they leave, I jump to the above floor and I look around to see where the killer was. When I do find him, I see that he had gotten another victim, Solomon. The killer already had his axe lodged into the man's neck. Aliza is up against the wall paralyzed with fear. While I was saving the others, the killer took another life. Slowly, he pulls the axe out and heads towards me. This time though, I draw my blade, ready to end this in a single strike. As he walks towards me, my attention is drawn to what happened behind him. Solomon slowly gets up. As he does, the wounds on him heal. By the time that he is up, the only damage done is to his clothing. "Now that wasn't very nice," he says to the killer, who is just as caught off guard as I am. Solomon had the presence of a demon, and it was an ancient one. I didn't know how I hadn't sensed it before, but it was clear now. Solomon, or whatever was possessing him, was far more deadly than the killer. The killer is confused, trying to decide which one of us to attack. While he does, Solomon charges at him and punches him right past me. He then begins pulling out a butcher's knife as he struts towards me. I take a shot and he slices the bolt in half. "Sorry, Will, thanks to Belial, that ain't going to work on me." He said a name that I had only ever read about. Belial the Worthless, an ancient demon known to kill young girls. Somehow Solomon had managed to seal him inside his own body. It was unheard of, yet explains why I only sensed the demon's presence when he used its power. I braced myself for a fight, but he simply walked past me. "Relax, Will, I'm here for the same reason as you. There's no need for us to fight." His attention is on the killer, who is now rushing towards us. The two clash, repeatedly stabbing one another. While Solomon healed from every blow, the killer began to bleed out. Solomon made sure to cut his most vital areas and arteries. The killer cried in agony as it slowly slumped towards the ground onto a pool of his own blood. Solomon stood over him triumphantly, totally covered in blood, both of his own and the killer. It was a violent scene, but he was smiling as if this were the happiest moment in his life. The monster that I had come for was dead, but one far more dangerous stood above me. He looked at me, and all I saw was pure evil. For the first time since the night my parents had died, I was afraid. "Well, that was certainly fun. I know that I should kill you, but something tells me that we will have more fun in the future. Until next time," he says to me happily, giving me away before walking away. There were two monsters in that body, and I wasn't sure which one was worse. I should have done something. I should have fought him. I had come to slay a monster. Instead, I let one go.